Now that we have seen how the New Testament relates Moses' account of Adam and Eve in the garden to the first coming of Christ, we should move to our second concern. How does the New Testament apply these principles to the continuation of the kingdom, the time in which we now live? Several passages in the New Testament stand out in this regard, but we'll look at only two. First, Paul's focus on these chapters of Genesis, and second, the way James wrote about these issues. Let's look first at Paul's words in 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3. But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. As Paul continued in this chapter, he explained that he was deeply concerned that the Corinthians would turn to another gospel. We see here that Paul appealed to Eve's negative example to warn against the worst kind of disloyalty, turning from the true gospel of Christ. Just as Moses used the story of Eve's temptation to warn Israel to move faithfully toward the promised land, Paul used the same story to warn believers in his day about the basic loyalty required of all who follow Christ. During the continuation of the kingdom, many people in the visible church face the danger of turning away from the essential truths of the gospel. The church must guard against this rank apostasy because the consequences are as horrible as they were for Adam and Eve. James took a posture similar to Paul's as he explained the role of testing and trials in the Christian life. In James chapter 1, verses 12 through 15, we read these words. Blessed is the man who perseveres under trial, because when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life that God has promised to those who love him. Each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then, after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. It's clear that James alluded to Genesis 2 through 3. In chapter 1, verse 14, he focused on human desire as the power behind enticement to sin. And it was Eve's desire for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil that caused her to sin. Second, James explained that those who pass the test will receive the crown of life. By contrast, the result of sin is that it gives birth to death. The contrast here between life and death parallels the contrast between life and death in the story of Adam and Eve. Just as Moses encouraged faithfulness in Israel during the trials of the wilderness by appealing to the temptation of Adam and Eve, Paul and James encourage us to fidelity during the trials of the continuation of the kingdom. Tests during the Christian life reveal our true character and prepare us for eternal life. By God's grace, we must do all we can to remain faithful to Christ so that we may be honored with the gift of eternal life in paradise.